Gary Stevenson made an appearance on Question Time, and, well, if you ask me, I think he wiped the floor with everyone.
This growth in wealth inequality, it is going to keep the middle class and the working class poor. It is going to gut government services, and that is the people in this room. Their kids, their grandkids will be poor.
Gary, you've obviously,
because we are not dealing with wealth inequality.
As you rightly say, you spent a lot of time thinking about this. What do you think the solution or solutions might be?
We have to shift the tax system. We have a tax system which taxes ordinary working people 30, 40, 50, 60%, while people like the Duke of Westminster can inherit £10 billion and pay nothing. If you do that, wealth will be sucked out of the middle class. It's already been completely bankrupted the working class. It will bankrupt the government, which is what we are seeing. And there'll be poverty. There'll be broad poverty. There'll be no middle class left. Why are we taxing working people more than billionaires? Tax wealth, not work. Give these people a break. Give their kids a chance. Tax the billionaires. Of course you should.
What makes you think it would be different here?
Fiona, we did it here. We did it here. We did it here in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and people like my dad, people like my granddad, who was a bus conductor, were able to buy houses, have financial security, have pensions, have retirements, go on holidays. We did it here. We did it here, and we're losing that now because we're not taxing the rich. The rich are getting richer, and ordinary families are losing the ability to buy houses, have kids. We can do it. We've done it before. When the second home stamp duty tax was brought in, I was very surprised because I didn't think the Conservatives would tax rich people. I looked into it. There was an exemption for people who bought 7 or more homes at once. And then Jeremy Hunt went and bought 7 homes. Listen, I understand it is difficult to tax rich people because politicians are rich people and they're funded by rich people and they put loopholes in the system that mean rich people don't pay them and it ends up being paid by working people. That doesn't mean we don't do it. What kind of world have we made here? You know, we need to look at we always look at the individual. This person has a mental health problem. This person has a mental health problem. It doesn't come out of nowhere. These people don't just suddenly get sick. My dad worked for the post office and he had a family and he bought a house and he has a retirement, he has a pension. Kids can't get that. It's a societal problem. We need to make sure young people have economic opportunity.
Incredible. You know, you've got the panellists who are out on such poshos versus Gary's come from a working class background, and you can see the stark difference. You know, he's very much a populist, and God knows we need more of that. Now, I thought this exchange with corporate lackey journalist Camilla was very, very interesting. Let's take a look.
We need to make a decision as to whether we want millionaires' cash to go into the exchequer or not. I appreciate that millionaires and billionaires do have a habit, seemingly, of avoiding quite a lot of tax. But let's use the example of Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the owner of Ineos. Before he moved to Monaco in 2020, he was adding hundreds of millions to HMRC. Now he's contributing nothing because he's a classic example of if the tax take gets too high, then unfortunately contributions go down because the rich can afford to move elsewhere and avoid it. And that's not progress.
Can I ask you a quick question on that? Do you think that China would allow somebody to own billions and billions and billions of pounds of Chinese assets and then move to Monaco and not pay tax on those assets?
I have no idea what the policy would be in China, but then lots of billionaires in China are reliant on slave labour, so it's probably not the best example.
Listen, we have given the literal assets of this country to very, very, very wealthy people, and we have created a tax system that makes it voluntary for them to pay tax. If you do that, ordinary people will get poorer and poorer and poorer every year, and millionaires and billionaires will get richer and richer every year, and ordinary people will not be able to buy homes and have families.
But Gary,
and I'm not just saying that, I bet on that.
Rich don't pay tax in the UK, are you?
The tax burden is falling on working people. Working people pay rates at much higher levels.
But you also agree, I appreciate working people are paying tax. Everyone's paying tax. Is anyone who's working not paying tax? The rich do pay their taxes. You're saying that you think they should pay more tax on their wealth? And are you differentiating between wealth or inheritance?
Wealth. They should pay tax on their wealth. If you don't tax these people on their wealth, they will squeeze everybody out.
And the European examples where that's been tried, France, Norway, etc., where they've had to scrap those schemes because A, they're too much to administrate, and B, they don't get enough revenue in. What's your response to that? Because it's not as if European nations haven't tried this. They've tried it, and unfortunately, it's failed.
She's from a private school, by the way. No surprise. Now, of course, this argument gets trotted out. You tax them, the rich leave, blah, 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 regardless of the facts. Now, we're going to discuss that in a short minute. And also, she said Norway. We're going to talk about Norway also in a short minute. Fiona Bruce, one of the highest paid BBC journalists, right? She also made an outright false claim. Can we have video 5, please?
You will know as well as I do that wealth taxes have been tried in a number of countries. Only Switzerland has stuck with it. I mean, they've got no capital gains tax, they've got no inheritance tax, they've got a slightly different situation.
Yep.
But most countries have abandoned them because they don't bring in that much revenue.
So, sorry, I was getting some messages from the producer. We got an update on some other story, which we'll probably talk about later on. But yeah, so that's Fiona Bruce saying that wealth taxes don't work. It was tried in Europe and it failed. Guess what? She's wrong. So despite people pushing lies and myths, it has actually been a success in Norway. So as you can see, there's a graph on screen. In 2022, they increased their wealth, the wealth tax, sorry, to 1.1%. This graph shows the implementation of a wealth tax, and you can see the revenue from the wealth tax skyrockets. So that's Fiona Bruce, big high-profile journalist, earning a lot of money, just blazingly saying that wealth taxes don't work in Europe. Camilla Tominey saying Norway scrapped it. Well, they didn't. So they're both lying or they're wrong. Now, finally, this clip, I think, is so unbelievably entertaining. It is perfect.
Who should be plugging the deficit, benefit claimants or billionaires?
Yeah, this is very frustrating for me. I've been screaming for 5 years that this is going to happen, that this situation will get worse and worse and worse, which it has been doing. I was betting on it for 10 years before that. For people who don't know who I am, I was Citibank's #1 trader in the world in 2011. I got paid millions of pounds because I bet that our economy would collapse because we wouldn't deal with growing inequality. I quit that job in 2014 to try and stop that inequality from growing. I was doing that in private until the beginning of COVID, when it became clear that inequality would increase enormously. Does anyone know what the total government deficit is since the beginning of COVID? It's £1 trillion now, which is £20,000 for every single adult in the country. So if every single one of you is not £20,000 cash richer, someone else has your money.
Is that the debt or the deficit?
It's the increase in the debt, which is the deficit.
Right, yeah.
Does anyone know who has that £1 trillion?
I think you might be about to tell us.
It is the richest people in the country. It is the richest people in the country. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If we pause the economy and give £1 trillion, £20,000 for every adult in this room and the rest of the country to the richest people in the country, and then unpause the economy, what do you think will happen to living standards for ordinary people? They will collapse. This is a problem of growing wealth inequality. The extremely rapid growth of wealth of the richest people in the country. The average billionaire increased their wealth by £630 million in the first year alone of COVID.
When you say it's for the wealthy people, isn't it things like the Canadian pension funds and all that sort of thing?
It's the wealthiest individuals in the country. It's multimillionaires and billionaires. These are the guys.
But also massive pension funds from abroad.
And here.
And who are the overwhelming owners of those pension funds? The richest people in the country. Listen, these men and women are not £20,000 richer.
I don't know if they're the richest people in the country, but okay.
Who here's £20,000 cash rich than before COVID? I'll tell you who probably is. Every single person on this panel, OK? The richest people in the country are getting richer.
Hang on, don't include us in all this. I don't know if you've seen the way the BBC works, but they're not exactly raising salaries by that much. Anyway.
I love that reaction, It's so funny. Not us. We're not wealthy. And you heard at the end, right? Fiona Bruce literally said that the BBC are not increasing their salary by that much. And she's right. The BBC didn't increase their salary by 20,000. It was 200,000. So before COVID, Fiona Bruce was earning £250,000 a year. And now she's on £450,000 a year. So yes, Gary was completely right. Let's look at the rest of the panel though, shall we? So Darren Jones, you can see him on camera. He was like, well, not me either. Darren Jones in 2019 was on around 79.5 grand. He's now on 126k. Richard Holden, also around 79.5 grand. He's on 93,904. And Daisy Cooper, well, it's the same as Holden. So yes, the members of the panel are rich and they've seen a big jump in their earnings in just a few short years. Sarah, I want to get your reaction to Gary's performance, but also I want to get your response from the reaction of the other panelists.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Stevens's presence is absolutely powerful in that space, not just because of his actual command. His command is brilliant, but because he brought a perspective that's virtually erased from mainstream media, an unapologetically working class voice that speaks plainly about economic injustice, about inequality that we're facing in this country, about austerity. He cut through all of that technocratic jargon that all of those individuals were trying to bring into the space and challenged this elite consensus that needed to be challenged in a way that was both clear and confrontational. I think too often we're having people that pander to A, neoliberal ideas, and B, the elite. And I'm glad that he's not doing that.
Guys, I'm sorry to interrupt. The stream is down for copyright.
What?
It's down.
Yeah, it's literally been taken. Oh, 1 second. It might have come back on now. 1 second.
What?
Yeah, it literally went off on like the actual preview as well. Like off. I'm on the
That's
YouTube
so
app.
strange. I've never had that before where it goes down. And are we
It went
live?
down.
Can you ask the guys if it's come back on in the comments? Could you just reply and let us know? Oh, it's just come back up. They've just said, okay, I'm going to leave. Sorry to interrupt, but it did go down for a few
so
seconds.
strange. I know obviously it might get demonetized or whatever, even though we're using BBC footage.
It's
But
fair.
for us to-
It's fair use anyway, but that can
It's
be
fair
disputed
use,
later.
exactly. Fucking bastards. They don't want us talking about.
Crazy.
They
No,
don't
they
want
said
us talking about
to go
Gary
back- they
Stevenson.
said to go back
Please.
4 minutes. Maybe just start the conversation again from bringing
your
Sarah in
question.
after.
Okay,
Sorry,
so
guys.
just start from the top, please, Sarah, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think your question was about getting the reaction from Gary's performance and also the reaction
and
from
also
the
the
other
reaction of the panelists
panelists.
as well, because it's very telling,
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely. So I was just saying that I found that Gary's presence was absolutely powerful, and I think that's what we need. Like he commanded presence, he commanded the facts, and he confronted the elite consensus. He's challenging the elite consensus. And what I find really interesting is that he's cutting through the technocratic jargon that they're trying to like impose upon him, and that's something that I think is great. He isn't afraid
Yep.
to critique the status quo, and I think that that's what's needed. We need working class voices, particularly like Gary's, who represent us, who have actually suffered the consequences of austerity and economic inequality for as long as we can remember, and then even more so when COVID hit. So his voice matters. But what I find really interesting is that contrast between Gary and the entire panel. Like there is a huge contrast there. The reaction from the panelists who are career politicians, high earning journalists. Fiona, the audacity she has to be like, well, they haven't raised our salaries at the BBC. You know what, Fiona? Fuck you. You're so entitled. Like, honestly, the professional class figures that offer these bland defenses of the system, I find to be so insulting. The reaction from them was defensive, it was patronizing, it was dismissive. And I think that kind of highlights what the elite consensus does all the time. Silence working class voices.
What's ironic about this, though, is he's probably the richest person on that panel, right? He is a multimillionaire. Look, I read his book. I suggest you go read it. The Training Game's called. And he goes through basically how he made his money. And he's explained it multiple times, but when you read the book, you really can get into why he made loads of money. But you get a sense, and you kind of know, he never lost his working class roots. And so he is no longer working class, but he definitely speaks for the working class. Because if you're an MP who's on 90 grand a year, who's definitely poorer than Gary Stevenson, or Camilla Tominey, who went to private school and just a corporate lucky journalist, right? They're poorer than he is technically, but they do the bidding of the bourgeoisie, don't they? And some of the attacks on Gary Stevenson are fucking hilarious, by the way. You know, I've heard he's a communist. He is an establishment stooge, because of people saying, well, he's come out of nowhere. Well, first of all, he hasn't come out of nowhere. I mean, I've been aware of his channel for quite a long time during the COVID times. It's just that sometimes like growth can be almost overnight. Okay, that's just how things work. You know, just because they come into your consciousness and you haven't heard of them before doesn't mean they're a plant, right? But the idea that he's an establishment plant who's railing against the super rich, I find that fucking hilarious. Yeah, I mean,
That's
anything to add on that?
frustrating. Yeah, that's frustrating. I mean, but I hate it when people do this, when they just brandish anyone as a communist because they're actually challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
That
And taxes are
actually
not
going
communism,
against,
by the way.
they're not communism at all, actually. Actually, they're not at it. Like, that's not at all. But I think what I find really interesting is that there is a lot of class privilege in that space. And Gary has lived the effects of austerity and inequality. Like, yes, currently he no longer is a part of the working class. However, he grew up as a working class boy. He has lived the effects of austerity and inequality, much like many of us have as well. So for them to kind of just brandish him as this communist because he's actually like, hey, let's sort this out. Let's actually tax the rich. I find to be a little bit disingenuous, and I hate using that word, but it's so entirely
Yeah, of course it
disingenuous.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, my phone is buzzing, and it hasn't stopped buzzing all day because I've done a couple of tweets defending Gary, calling some people out,
Good.
and it's now inundated with so many people saying the same things, that he's a commie, he's a socialist. Look, I don't think Gary Stevenson is particularly ideological. I don't know if he knows he's a socialist or if he thinks he's a socialist or not. I think he just experienced what it's like in the trading game, realizing that the economy is fucked, people are poor, and he was making money off of it.
Yeah.
And he realized it was inequality. This is just purely pragmatic for him. I doubt he's a socialist. You know, I don't know if he even thinks about that. That is irrelevant to me. It is it's not material. What is material is inequality is absolutely destroying this economy and destroying society. And you got just brain dead idiots on Twitter just trotting out the line of the very wealthy, you know, because it's Elon Musk's Twitter, right? It's the bootlicking website. Actually, taxes don't work. Well, what about the 50s, 60s, and 70s when you actually had income taxes? I'm talking about, not even wealth taxes. Income taxes were something like 90 to 95% on the very richest. And what happened? Did the sky fall in? No, the society was far more equal. You have people who could have a home and raise a family on one income. And guess what? The very richest who were paying, 90% marginal tax rate, they were still absolutely loving life because they were still incredibly rich. That's what we had. And people like Gary are not even calling for that. We're just saying, maybe a 1%, wealth tax. And they're losing their minds. It's like the meme where someone's on like 30, 40 grand a year is simping for the billionaire class. It's pathetic.
It's so true. No, but you're so right. No, they're losing their shit. The rich don't oppose these wealth taxes.
They don't care about you. They're not thinking about you.
They never cared. But the thing is, they don't oppose these wealth taxes because they think it won't work. They oppose them because they know it will work. That's the issue. A well-designed wealth tax properly enforced, would actually challenge their power. And that's why they fight so hard against it, because they want to delegitimize the very idea of being taxed a little bit more. I think the spectre of capital flight is literally raised every single time the working class demands fairness. And I'm sick and tired of them literally throwing their toys out the pram every time we say you need to pay your fair share. But and it is really backed up by data. And we can. I think you want to talk about Norway, and I'll let you get into that. But you will. It was rightly pointed out, I think. Or wrongly pointed out by that woman who I don't know her name. I can't remember her name. What was her name? The one that was like, well, look at Norway and it didn't work there.
Camilla Tominey.
Yeah, the rich didn't vanish into thin air, like you said. They didn't just disappear. They were still there, and revenue actually shot up when their wealth tax went up. So I'm confused. So we're seeing ideological warfare, to be honest, disguised as economic common sense. Every single time Gary challenged them, they pivoted. They weren't engaging in an actual debate.
It's ideological and class warfare, isn't it? It's just the mainstream media journalists who work for the corporate media being paid to say that actually we can't tax the rich. It's very funny because he mentions that on the clip. He says it's very hard to tax the rich because you've got politicians who go on nice little corporate retreats. They go to Davos, and they shack up with these guys who just want to basically buy you and, influence the politics of the MPs. Then you're people in the media. And that's why it's hard to do, right? Because there's no willingness to it. And to jump off what you said, because I want to point out to people, there's this, by the way, this stream is doing very, very well. There's a lot of viewers today. So there might be people who have never heard of Turn Left or not left-wing themselves. I want to point out to you, right, when corporate hacks say taxes don't work or rich people will leave, you have to understand that this isn't out of concern that it won't work. These are excuses. They are principally against it. If they were genuine, why not try it in this country? Let's see who's right. Because if you're so sure that it won't work, do it and prove us wrong. It's a similar argument or discussion when it comes to universal basic income, right? All I see is someone on the panel saying, we support UBI, and someone else saying, well, it's a nice idea. I love that idea, but it just won't work. Why don't you try it and prove us wrong? It's not because they don't think it works or that they pretend to support it. It's because they do not support it. That's literally the truth.
Exactly.
You know? They don't want them being implemented because they're worried that it will work. So, yeah, I mean, I think I love to talk about Gary. I love to talk about taxes, but we're probably going to leave it there. 8:10 already. We've probably exhausted a lot of things we want
I
to
just
say
wanted to
anyway.
say
Unless there's
one more
anything you
thing.
want
I'm
to.
so sorry. Yeah, just
please,
one
no,
more
no,
thing.
please go for it.
The thing is, though, the likes of Gary, and I think the likes of us and anyone who kind of agrees with Gary, I think we're breaking the unspoken rule that needs to be broken every single time, and it's polite bourgeoisie politics. Like this whole idea, like you shouldn't name the system, don't talk about capitalism, don't talk about class. But I think we do need to talk about it. We need to talk about it plainly, just like Gary does, and without apology, to be honest. And calling, because they tend to do it a lot. I've been called a communist so often, but likes of Gary also getting called a communist. It's just classic red baiting. I think it's just designed to delegitimize any conversation around the class war. So keep talking about it. That's what I want to say.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.